November 15th, 1875. A week had passed since the Malays had driven the British back from the outskirts of Pasir Salak. The British were bloodied, humiliated, and still in disbelief that their empire could be so easily defied by Malay fighters armed with little more than muskets and blades. Now, the empire would strike back. Troops were gathered, gunboats churned the muddy waters of the Perak River, and howitzers and rockets were primed and ready to be unleashed upon the recalcitrant Malays. In this episode, we return to the burning banks of the Perak River, where the British sought to erase their defeat with fire. This would no longer be a punitive raid. It would be an act of revenge. The initial British assault on the stockades at Kampung Biak on November 7, 1875, had been a complete failure. Forced into a swift retreat, the British suffered 17 killed and wounded, while the Malays tasted victory in open combat, a triumph that greatly boosted their morale and determination to fight on. More than that, what had seemed an isolated outbreak in a small village on the Perak River now threatened to ignite a peninsula-wide war of resistance against British rule in Malaya. The British Empire had been humbled and humiliated. An overwhelming force was deemed necessary to restore its honour. The Governor-General of the Strait Settlements himself, William Jervois, arrived at the estuary of the Perak River just days after the disaster at Kampung Biak to personally oversee preparations for a second operation against the Malays at Pasir Salak. He appointed Major Samuel Dunlop of the Royal Artillery as temporary Special Commissioner in Perak, replacing Captain William Innes, who had been killed in that final bayonet charge at the Malay stockades in Kampung Biak. Dunlop had been acting Inspector General of Police of the Strait Settlements when he led a pacification mission to Perak in 1874 to enforce a truce among the Chinese factions of the Larut War and disarm the rival clans. He was also present at Pangkor when the treaty with the Malay chiefs was signed. Dunlop later acted as British Commissioner in Sungai Ujong during disturbances between the Datuk Kelana and the Datuk Bandar, and successfully persuaded the Datuk Bandar to surrender himself and his men. Jervois was not the only arrival at the Perak River in the days following the Kampung Biak assault. Just one day after the battle, Captain William Whitlar arrived during the night with a fresh detachment of the 1st Battalion of the 10th Regiment, now totaling 131 men and 3 officers. Lieutenant Monckton of the Royal Artillery also arrived with 20 men and a 7-pounder rifled gun. By this time, 2 Royal Navy gunboats were operating at the Perak River estuary, HMS Thistle and HMS Fly. Officers and men from these vessels were transferred to the Bandar Baru Residency to join the renewed offensive. This naval brigade, led by Commander Francis Stirling of the Thistle, consisted of about 80 bluejackets and 15 Marines. It also brought formidable firepower, 4 longboats were fitted to carry 2 12-pounder howitzers, 1 7-pounder boat gun, 2 20-pounder naval rocket tubes, and a Cohorn mortar. The plan for the second attack recognized the absolute necessity of artillery support sorely missed in the first assault. The total British force mustered for the second attack numbered about 250 troops. Despite their poor performance in the earlier engagement, the 50 Sikhs of the Residency and Penang Police were again included. Swettenham's 20 Malay scouts were once again tasked with advancing ahead of the main force to reconnoitre the route and be the first to breach the stockades ahead of the main assault. British commanders noted that Malay scouts were always first to get into the stockades, and Swettenham was entrusted with this crucial forward role, capitalizing on his local knowledge and his close personal ties with the Malay scouts. The new plan called for a coordinated land and river assault, with Major Dunlop overseeing the mission, Captain Whitler commanding the troops, and Commander Stirling leading the Naval Brigade. The strategy relied heavily on intelligence that was provided by an advisor to Raja Muda Yusuf. He had arrived on the 14th with details of the position and nature of Maharaja Lela's fighters, stockades, and their artillery. This informant also revealed that Panglima Perang Semaun commanded the first stockade at Kampung Biak. Dunlop wrote to Sultan Abdullah requesting logistical support for the attack. The Sultan supplied 16 transport boats, but no rowers or polers could be found willing to operate them. Crucially, the British also received reports from informants suggesting that the Malay stockades at Pasir Salak might soon be abandoned, owing to a severe shortage of food and ammunition. The gunboats Thistle and Fly had by then imposed a tight naval blockade of the Perak River estuary, intercepting even the smallest boats that might be carrying arms, gunpowder, or, most crucially, rice to the Pasir Salak defenders. Starvation had begun among the Perak Malays. The informants confirmed that 1/3 of the 300 fighters at Pasir Salak had already deserted their positions due to hunger and a lack of gunpowder. A Malay chief, Penghulu Mat Ali, had earlier gathered men for 10 large boats, arming them with Lela or swivel guns. Upon learning of Mr. Birch's murder, he had planned to attack Kota Setia near the estuary to support the Pasir Salak Malays and open supply lines from the estuary to Maharaja Lela's beleaguered forces. However, the presence of 2 Royal Navy gunboats thwarted this plan. Penghulu Mat Ali was captured by the British at Durian Sebatang on November 11th and held as a prisoner of war for the remainder of the conflict. With the Malays cut off from supplies and reinforcements, Dunlop judged the time right for a swift and decisive hammer blow. The attack was set for the morning of November 15th. The troops were roused at 3 in the morning, and embarkation began at 5. By 6:30 a.m., the entire force was underway. Progress up the fast-moving waters of the Perak River was slow, its waters being swollen by recent monsoon rains. It was only 2 hours later that the force disembarked at Pasir Panjang, a landing place a couple of miles south of Pasir Salak. The landed troops were assembled into formation, and the advance was sounded at 9:30 a.m. They moved slowly up the west bank of the river towards the scene of their earlier disastrous encounter at Kampung Biak. This time, however, they halted short of the stockade and waited for the flotilla carrying the artillery to arrive. The Naval Brigade comprised 7 boats, led by a steam-powered launch carrying Commander Sterling and his staff. Following close behind were 2 longboats, fitted with 12-pounder howitzers. 2 other boats equipped with 24-pounder rocket tubes, 1 boat mounting a 7-pounder gun, and another carrying a Cohorn mortar. As the flotilla turned a bend in the river, Kampung Biak came into view. The first shot of the battle was then fired at 10 a.m. from the 7-pounder gun. The Malays replied almost at once with a blast from their largest swivel gun, the shot missing its mark but passing perilously close to the British boats. All the guns and rocket boats now opened a steady and well-directed fire on the Malay positions from a range of 1,100 yards. The boats continued to close in, eventually to within 300 yards, from where they could enfilade the stockade and fire along the entire length of its defences. Observers noted that it was not the guns, but the screaming 24-pounder rockets that struck the greatest terror into the defenders. Though less accurate and less destructive than artillery shells, these devilish rockets, as the Malays later called them, had a profound psychological impact, spreading panic and terror through their ranks. Meanwhile, the advance guard, Swettenham's Malay scouts and a party of Marines under Mr. Plunkett, pushed through the tall, dense cornfields towards the Kampung Biak stockade. The Royal Artillery had brought a brass 12-pounder howitzer into action, firing several rounds of case shot into the defences. Combined artillery and small arms fire soon silenced the stockade's defenders, and the British troops rushed forward. Clambering over the timber palisades, they found the stockade completely deserted. 2 Malay guns were seized, spiked, and thrown into the river. With the aid of artillery, it took mere minutes to accomplish what the British had failed to do in 2.5 grueling hours just a week before. The land force pressed on through the dense banana groves and tangled jungle behind the stockade, while the Naval Brigade's boats advanced in concert, unleashing rockets and shells into the foliage ahead to clear the way for the troops. They soon encountered a second stockade at Bandar Tua, about a mile further on. This too was quickly taken, its defenders driven out by the naval bombardment before the main body arrived. The British force now approached Pasir Salak itself, where Mr. Birch's boat was seen moored by the riverbank near Maharaja Lela's house and the surrounding stockade. The house stood some 200 yards from the river, within an orchard of fruit trees. It was enclosed by a strong earth embankment and timber palisade, the earthworks measuring about 8 feet high and 5 feet thick. The rampart was crowned with sharpened stakes, or ranjau, projecting 18 inches from the ground. 2 log watchtowers mounted with swivel guns overlooked the defences, and a moat of water 4 feet wide encircled the stockade. The Malays in the stockade immediately opened fire on the advancing troops, while 2 of the stockade's guns engaged the British boats from about 1,000 yards. The Naval Brigade pressed forward, continuously shelling and rocketing the stockade until it took up a final position some 600 yards away from the earthworks. One of the Malay guns burst, and by about 4 p.m, further shelling had silenced the enemy's fire. The troops advanced and clambered over the main stockade's ramparts, almost simultaneously with a landing party of blue jackets from the Naval brigade. Maharaja Laila's stronghold was found completely deserted. The battle had lasted a grueling 6 hours. The scene now must have been one of utter ruin, destruction and desolation. The British had burned every house along their line of advance from Kampung Biak to Pasir Salak, with one observer noting that the entire west bank of the Perak River for 1.5 miles was a sheet of flame. In Pasir Salak itself, Maharaja Laila's house was the first to be put to the torch. The troops then set about burning every house in the village. Even a mat bathing house built on a raft, where birch had been killed, was cut adrift, set on fire, and sent floating down the river like a burning effigy. At Major Dunlop's orders, Commander Sterling led a party of blue jackets to burn Datuk Sagor's house across the river at Kampung Gajah. Although a villager had raised a white flag there, the blue jackets then proceeded to burn the remaining houses in that unfortunate village. The only resistance seen in the village that day actually came only after its fiery destruction had begun, when a lone spearman emerged and hurled a spear at one of the Penang policemen, wounding him. The man was immediately shot dead. Such wholesale burnings of villages would today probably be regarded as war crimes. Frank Swettenham later wrote that the destruction of Pasir Salak was intended to prevent its reoccupation. If it sounds severe now, it was then necessary, he maintained. At the House of Lords in England, however, Lord Stanley of Alderley condemned what he termed the cruelties practiced against the Malays. A detailed account published in the Times of London observed that the burning of Kampung Gajah in particular grates against one's ideas of justice. Nevertheless, British public opinion, and certainly the British media, largely accepted the necessity of extreme measures to avenge Birch's murder. William Maxwell, then Deputy Commissioner in Perak, later lamented the public's indifference to the injustices of the war, noting that, in their view, it was not horrible and sensational enough. He concluded that the British public often cheered the slaughter of natives without troubling to consider, as he put it, the rights and wrongs of the matter. After all, for the British, it was a surprisingly bloodless victory. Not a single soldier was killed, and the only recorded casualty was Inspector Lajis, the policeman who was slightly wounded by a spear in Kampung Gajah. The number of Malays killed or wounded remains unknown. The Malays invariably carried off their dead and wounded, and no bodies were left behind save that of the lone spearman in Kampung Gajah. British officers, however, believed that Malay losses were heavy, judging from the bloodstains found throughout the captured stockades, particularly at Kampung Biak. One unfortunate Malay fighter had been found in the surrounding jungle days later. He was wounded and had lain senseless with pain for days, unable to move and dying from thirst. A correspondent for the Times noted that ants had already commenced eating into his wounds. Following their victory at Pasir Salak, the British strategic focus shifted rapidly upstream towards the occupation of the entire state of Perak. Reinforcements arrived from India and Hong Kong, and Major General Colburn, commander of British forces in China and the Straits settlements, came to Perak to take personal command. His strategy called for a two-pronged advance. Colburn's column moving north along the Perak River to Belanja and Kinta, while Brigadier General Ross led another eastward thrust from Larut to Kuala Kangsar. After their crushing triumph at Pasir Salak, one would not be mistaken in thinking that the British had at last regained the initiative and were poised to bring the Perak Malays to heel within weeks. Yet, scarcely 10 days later, a fresh calamity would shatter those expectations. A rude shock that came not from the banks of the Perak River, but 200 miles to the south, in the turbulent little state of Sungai Ujong. Join me on Wednesday, November 26, to discover what happened at this encounter in the next episode of this channel's Perak War 150th Anniversary Special. Until then, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, do consider giving the video a like, sharing it with your family and friends, giving us your thoughts in the comments below, or subscribing to join me on future adventures exploring the lost chronicles of Malayan history. I remain as ever, your grateful chronicler. Cheerio.